Hello everyone, and welcome to this this video from the RICS Tech Partner Program. My name is Andrew Knight, and I'm the global lead for our data and technology work. I sit within the standards, regulatory and thought leadership part of the organization here at RICS. And today I'm really happy to have Vik Tara from Blueprint Technologies here to talk about a number of themes, particularly around their check docs application, and indeed one of the fundamental issues, which is how to identify properties. So welcome, Vik.
Yeah, hi Andrew. Yes, and thanks for the
Pleasure.
invite.
Pleasure. Well, I always ask the first question, which is a bit of a background on your organization and also you personally in your team in terms of the backstory and experience that has brought you into PropTech.
Oh, okay. Well, interestingly, I started my journey or my career in residential property after doing a property degree, and so I actually was pursuing an early career as a chartered surveyor. So I did a property degree and I applied to RICS, to join. Yeah, I guess my career in property went very well, but I didn't in the end end up being a RICS surveyor. What I did is built up lettings businesses throughout the 90s, and the idea, I guess, at that point was to have a sort of general practice estate agency business and build that up and be the valuing surveyor of that business. But lettings in the 90s took off as a massive boom area, post the 1988 Housing Act and the short hold tenancy introduction. And so I just ended up, I guess, investing all my energy into building up lettings and management businesses in time. However, before embarking on my property career, and certainly at school, I was really an avid self-taught programmer. So I started programming, when I was sort of 12, 13 years old on Commodore PETs and the microcomputers, and so that's quite a long time ago.
Yes.
And so, what I found myself doing all the time in the lettings business was always looking for ways to bring technology into the business. And that really culminated towards the end of the 90s, about 98, 99, where I built a web portal using PHP to advertise properties in the lettings business. And that was quite an unheard of thing, I guess, in 98, 99. But the reason that we did it is that we were handling lots of accommodation for universities. And so, universities and university students were just ahead of the game in terms of access to the internet and access to technology. So we started solving problems there. And so I think when I started solving some of those problems with technology, it really showed me that, my next career moves were into PropTech. And so in around 2002, I bought the majority stake in technology Blueprint, which was already providing software to the residential letting sector. I bought that with a view to expanding the business and also building an enterprise grade system which would scale to be able to be an end-to-end platform to run letting agency businesses. It was really aimed at the large corporates who needed scalable systems that could handle large volume. And so that's really where I came into PropTech, and that was a long time before, I guess, the term PropTech had been coined.
So you've existed,
We've existed for quite a while, yeah. And so we've been really solving the challenges that large-scale letting and management companies face. And I understand about somewhere around 8% of all rental transactions that go on through our system. So we've done pretty well with that one, and we've got quite a good market share. But subsequent to that, I have created other prop tech startups, and CheckDocs is one of them. And in CheckDocs, what we've done is, I guess, created a platform that's all about helping people maintain the compliance burden around property, because as we all know, that's a sector, certainly residential property to rent has been loosely regulated, and historically has not had the best name. And so what we see going on now is increasingly a greater regulation burden. It's a really important regulation burden because it massively improves quality and standards. However, as the burden gets bigger and bigger, who pays for it? That's always the question with this. And if we don't have technologies, to aid the compliance burden, the consumer pays for it in the end. Really, the resulting costs come down to whoever's buying the goods at the end. And so, what we're doing is helping companies to maintain their clients, their compliance burden, using automation, AI, access to data, those technologies, so they don't need teams or hundreds of people in their business, looking after whatever the latest regulation is that the government bring out. So we know that regulation isn't going to stop in the near future, and businesses need to be able to manage their burden.
Indeed.
So,
from this point of view of CheckDocs and this whole kind of right to rent, I know one of the themes we want to explore this morning is this whole concept of the UPRN helping as part of the data sets. Can you explain, perhaps for people who are listening and viewing who perhaps haven't come across it, what is the UPRN? Give us a bit of a kind of 101 to what it is basically, and then clearly how does it link into your app?
Yeah, okay, so the UPRN, it gives us a unique identifier or a number to identify locations. And usually that means, locations that actually resolve to an address as well. I think they use the term addressable units or something like that, or addressable locations. And so that could be, the post box at the end of the road. It's got an address. It might not be a sort of traditional, number 25 Smith Street address, but it's got an address. And so what the UPRN gives us is it is literally a unique identifier for that, that can be shared between different people that have got different data points that relate to the same address. And you might say, well, why don't we just use the address?
Exactly.
But there are challenges. When you get down to the technology layer, there are challenges, and the simplest one of those challenges is I call an address flat 1, 25 Smith Street, and somebody else calls it apartment 1, 25 Smith Street, and guess what? They're not the same address. And so when you're trying to use technology to work with this type of data, the UPRN is a wonderful thing, because it's a unique number that's easy to match with a unique number, and so that's where the UPRN becomes, particularly useful for people like us that are innovating around residential property technology and commercial too. But any technology really that's working with different data sources, where we want to talk to different systems, but have some type of common reference over an address.
So, is it an oversimplification to say that everyone should use it, or are there some key stakeholders that you think particularly to get adoption going should be focusing on using and sharing data with the UPRN?
I think that everybody should use it. I think it makes sense for UPRN to be widely used in platforms and wherever people are sharing data. It just makes a lot of sense, because wherever we're writing systems that that work with address data or locations, we're using databases, and they generally all have their own unique identifier, their own unique reference. And so it occurs to me that using a common one, like the UPRN, is going to help, and it's going to help people who are building technologies, and it's going to help people that are using those technologies just get the job done better, in a better way,
Exactly.
more easily, you know,
Exactly.
less effort. However, there are some barriers to really make this happen, and I think that's why there's quite a lot of discussion. There's lots of PR around it. Adoption seems okay, but I think the adoption of this could be supercharged. There are still, you know, a couple of barriers in the way.
So, I mean, what are the main barriers? I mean, some of them, I think, to some extent, are still perhaps lack of awareness, particularly, I guess, in terms of consumers almost being aware and almost demanding in a polite way that they should have access to their own UPRN and know, you know, and see it on documents like, I don't know, council tax or planning regs or whatever it might be.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's it. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Andrew, that that it's incredibly useful for the consumer to know, to have that unique identifier. But what's in the way of that? And I'll give you the case, you know, in Checkbox, where we've extensively used UPRN is in our property licensing.
Right.
And so what we do there is we help people to maintain their compliance burden with HMOs. You know, HMOs have different rule sets depending on where your property is located. So what we've got to do all the time with our technology is match a customer's property against various rule sets that exist. So you've got two different data sources. You've got the customer's data, you've got local authorities' data right across the country, and you're trying to compare addresses between these two different data sources. So what you need is a unique identifier to be able to do that. Otherwise, you have a nightmare trying to compare addresses that somebody's typed in slightly differently. So UPRN is an absolutely brilliant thing for us in terms of making that application work and making it work, you know, to a high degree of accuracy. So it works very well there. But the problem that we faced, or the barrier that we faced, is that we could get the UPRN, and the UPRN is easily available. That data is freely available, but we couldn't get the corresponding address. So I've got a database on one side full of addresses. I've got a database on the other side full of addresses, and I want to be able to compare them using UPRN, but actually have to then buy the address data that goes with the UPRN. You know, and then that, to me, I suppose when I came across it, was a barrier. It requires investment. It means that you know, if we want to innovate as prop techs, we're definitely going to have to buy this address plus UPRN data. There's loads of it out there, and it's not cheap. But similarly for the consumer, you know, the consumer knows their own address, but how do they find the UPRN for their address without having to buy that data from somebody? Well, somebody's got to be able to provide that. And so there's a barrier, really, because you know, it's probably, I've got a slide here. I'll just on the screen, because if you think about it, when you look at a UPRN, what you get is this. So you've got a number, UPRN, and then you've got the coordinates, right? So I can say that this unique reference number identifies the site at this set of coordinates. That's what we can do at the moment. But taking your example, what you really want is for the consumer to know, at my house at 25 Smith Street, my UPRN is this. But not only for consumers, probably for everybody. You know, if that data is available, you know, under a more permissive license, then I think, you know, innovation in this space gets turbocharged. Adoption becomes an absolute no-brainer, you know, to companies that are producing technology that needs to compare data in these ways, or link data in these ways. So I think that's you know, potentially a barrier that we've seen, but one that's quite easily circumvented, quite easily removed.
I mean, given that I believe under the open government license, you know, central local government should have access to this, are you still seeing challenges where, you know, data sets from, you know, either local or central government still don't have UPRN? Because in theory, at least, one should be able to join those data sets together. But is that still a challenge for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge. I don't think we've come across any registers of licenses that contain a UPRN. So I'm talking, so you say yes, local authority definitely have access to it, but I don't believe we've come across any use of it so far. So adoption there, where they do have access under permissive license, is still not actually being adopted. It's an interesting point, actually, now that you make it, that there's a big part of the industry that do have access to it, but they're not using it.
Yes, and I suppose as ever, sometimes, you know, there are barriers, but there's also kind of behavioural and awareness barriers, and sometimes, I guess, dare I say, an inertia problem of existing systems, which simply doesn't have the box on the screen to put in the UPRN, so that there's almost not even that kind of data collection, or just that inherent sense that should be a field that's added. You know, it is, I guess, frustrating that as you say, on the one hand, there are certain parts of the market that don't have access without, as you say, that fiscal investment, and other parts of the ecosystem that have it that still don't use it. And I guess the challenge for all of us is how do we influence, I suppose, in this sense, central local government to adopt it internally, to help us as a first step almost.
Yeah, sure. And I think that the easy route there again is talking to the techs, because you know, what you see or what we experience when we look at local authorities and their ways of sharing licensing data and information is that there are some systems that are available there that local authorities are using, and they're probably using common systems. So working with the providers of local authority systems is probably the way to get adoption happening faster. You know, that's the conduit, I guess, that different local authorities go to. You know, if you look at the local authority websites, there are generic systems that people are buying to do that, and also some of the systems for licensing and other stuff. So the providers of those systems, if they were encouraged to make the changes to support UPRN, it would come into local authority and local authority data sort of automatically. You've also got some of the local authorities that are much more sort of forward in their use of data, and they've got data teams and tech teams inside local authorities. So again, it's getting those tech people together, you know, around this concept, and really getting them to understand the benefit. Lobbying at local authority level as well probably would help. You know, if we're able to speak with local authorities or people that have influence at the local authority level, you know, and just showcase what's this all about, and you know, a bit of a bigger awareness exercise.
And I guess it's, as ever, a sense of what's in it for them, that they must see the value as well, that they must see that they could coordinate some of their internal systems better. Because, you know, the sample you've got on the screen there, we're looking at some geospatial coordinates, but clearly there's the potential to be linking in EPC information, flood risk. If you think of broader use cases for property outside of just rental, there are probably dozens of instances where, by linking data sets together, as you say, through a unique identifier, not trying to address match, that there's a huge amount of data. And I suppose one of the challenges, and perhaps interesting to say whether you've dealt with this in some ways, is almost the governance of making sure that there's a danger sometimes if you join too much data together, who can see what. So I suppose that counter argument is making sure that there's governance around this, so that people don't find too much information about their property being linked together and put into the public domain. Has that been something that you've addressed at all, either in check docs or?
You know, I suppose what we see is that in check docs is that we're working with data that's already in the public domain, and so we don't have you know, that particular challenge. But I understand your point. Once you've got a unique reference, if you're starting to record everything about property that's going on against a UPRN, then you can link everything. The question is, what's the risk there?
Yeah.
Because we're talking property, physical property, buildings, assets, structures. There's probably not much data that doesn't need to be transparent. There might be privacy aspects to that. And that's more about, I suppose, personal use or of property and that type of thing. Perhaps enforcement, comes into that. But I hold the view that if it's public domain, it's public domain, and lots of stuff about our houses and properties and how they're built and constructed is public domain. It's just not linked together.
Exactly.
So
it is that point almost about that a lot of this is already available. I guess the issue sometimes is that by having the UPRN, you can begin to build data sets at scale, can't you? Because I know at the moment, you can go on and manually check the EPC, you can manually check a title number for a property. It's that ability to scale that kind of aggregation of data, which I suppose might begin to raise some concerns to make sure that market participants are doing the right ethical thing with these kind of data sets at scale. In that way.
That's it. Yeah, I think we probably have got the luxury though of established bodies that look after those particular risks. I don't think that we have a new problem or a new challenge to solve here. That's literally governance of the use of data and big data. So I think the government have got a reasonable handle on that, and there are quite some regulations around it now. So that side of it doesn't concern me as much. I think the benefits of being able to link data. I mean, who wouldn't want to have the history of everything that's gone on with the property they own? Lots of people are really interested to know. And it's incredibly useful information. And if you have one place to be able to go, right, here's my UPRN, I just want to know the history of what's gone on with my address. Pretty much, like you can do a lookup, you can do a basic land registry lookup. Now I think free and this sort of stuff. So over time, we've got more access to this data. It's always been public domain. It's just about can I see it? Can I easily view it in an interface which is useful to me?
So I mean, we've talked about the barriers. I mean, what kind of innovation do you think is being currently stifled to a degree that because of the lack of availability and the lack of usage, as we've described by certain types of local authorities?
If I take my own example here with check docs, what's being stifled? Well, I think there's one or two people in the market. Would there be more people in the market if the barrier was lower and you required less money? Would it allow other startups to innovate and go further? It's that that we really think about. If we're having a lot of cost involved, in accessing data to build technology, then the barrier is, do you have that money to get in? And requires more funding, and technology companies that have got ideas require more funding to try out those ideas. So it's really a problem for them. But also the price to the end user. Eventually the cost of this data is just passed down to the person that buys it. For us, that's the agents that we sell to, and they'll pass on their cost to their customers as well. So someone pays in the end.
Exactly.
Starts with innovation and ends up costing more money.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm working with the home buying and selling group in the UK, and looking at the concepts of sort of effectively upfront information, where once again the UPRN is key to join all these data sets together, whether it's getting obviously title information, EPC, local land charge information pulled in, building reg, planning permissions, all those things, and so often you see these pieces of information not only not having a UPRN, but although they may be digital, to be honest, they're just a document. I mean, is that another area where you're still seeing a challenge around information being held as documents, not as structured data, so that once again, you're not really being able to kind of automate, not in a Machiavellian way, but automate in a responsible way, because
But
you're
we
simply
have
looking at a
to.
PDF.
I mean, it's a messy exercise, is what I'll say. But because the data that we're dealing with, I think a decent proportion of it is only published as PDF.
Mm.
So we don't have a choice. We have to build the tech that then is able to intelligently extract data from PDFs and assemble it in some sort of machine readable form. And so that's our job. But you're right to call it. If data is presented as text data with a UPRN, yeah, the barrier and the amount of technology that you have to implement just comes right down.
Yeah.
Because it's in a format that you can actually use straight off the bat.
Yeah.
But no, we're literally pulling data from inside PDFs and then assembling it and making some sense out of it, because the local authorities aren't geared up to provide this data in a way that's easier for us to consume.
As you say, so it's almost the UPRN is at least a first step to cut out a percentage of that work, and at least then leave you with documents. And I presume you're using machine learning or those kind of techniques to learn how to interpret, different sets of PDFs where you're getting a common layout to some extent.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly what we're doing, right? So, and it can be PDFs. It can, and sometimes it's it's not even. You get two types of PDF, right? You get a PDF which has got actually text in it, but sometimes it's just a picture.
Yeah.
So those are the really interesting ones. Local authorities scanned the document, made a PDF, and put it online.
I know. I mean, I always bore people with a story about I live in a conservation area in southwest London, and I did have to check the Article 4 direction, and I did find it digitally, but it was a scanned copy of a 1990 era typewritten document, and even better, they'd had to write on it manually with a ballpoint pen which numbers in the street were affected. So I'm not sure whether your machine learning would be able to work that one.
Yeah, I think we might struggle with that one. So the handwriting recognition is it's not so accurate. But yeah, exactly those challenges. Because obviously Article 4 directions are a big deal in HMO licensing. So yeah, we've had to amass a big database of all of the Article 4 directions relating to HMO. I think we've been fortunate we haven't come across any handwritten.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, mine's probably an extreme example, but I always use it because it does bring alive this sense of document, not data. And when you talk to many of the participants, that they freely admit that we're still in that document, not data world, where a building reg will be issued as a PDF, or a granted planning permission will be issued as a document, and so many of these things are still documents.
We've come across some local authorities that that have satisfied. They have an obligation to publish the register, the HMO register data under the law, and so we've come across some local authorities that have satisfied that obligation by saying, we have a copy of it and you can come and have a look, and that's it. So we've literally had to go and have a look and take a picture of it. They send someone to the local authority, they get the register out and put it in front of you, and you can take a picture of it, and there you've got the data, and now we have a picture of the data and we can extract the data from it. So yeah, you get from one local authority that have that method right the way to another that has an API that you can hit anytime you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and programmatically grab the data in a sensible way for technologies to interact with. So yeah, unfortunately, we've still got some authorities that are working with paper documents, and they're not even there to publish it on the internet.
Indeed. So, I mean, in terms of sort of getting more adoption, I mean, there's obviously a role that bodies like ourselves can play with our members, and as much as we can, reaching consumers. But there's obviously clearly a big role for us to be positively influencing local and central government. I mean, is there a kind of, to use the kind of, I don't know whether it's a 90s or a 2000s phrase, the killer app thing, is there a kind of, from a government perspective, one or two killer sort of apps where we could be saying to local and central government, look, if you at least started using it here, think of the savings they would generate. Think of the automation benefits it would bring internally to them as organisations.
Well, I think for local government, there's tons, because you think about how the local authority are providing services to addresses all of the time. I mean, how many phone calls must they take, or emails must they take, just to answer basic queries all the time about what's my refuse collection day, or what's this, or what's that, or stuff related to energy performance, or regulation, or anything. You know, having the ability to have some type of centralized and linked data on UPRN, that's going to help local authorities reduce cost, provide better services, you know, to consumers. So it seems a no-brainer. I mean, local authority portal, or a, you know, a consumer portal, you know, wouldn't that be a great thing?
I mean, you have to assume that presumably even within their internal systems, they have the same challenges of aligning data from one department to the next. So they're probably still having to do manual address matching or something an equivalent, because I would presume that if they're not using the UPRN internally, they have to have some other methodology.
Sure. Yeah, and so either that is address matching or fuzzy matching, or you know, they're doing something less elegant, you know, with their own system. So yeah, that's going to mean that less accuracy. So accuracy, I suppose, is the big win. But what does accuracy translate into? Better quality service, a better quality product. You know, in terms of what we do, you know, we get many more decisions right where there's a UPRN on both the customer data set and the local authority data set. So that's what we do. We add it to our data. So we have to, I guess, we work with public available data, publicly available data, and then we're you know, enriching that with UPRN, you know, so that our matching can be very much more accurate.
I mean, is there also a use case? Because to be honest, you know, the property industry, like any sector, has pockets or areas where there can be fraudulent behaviour. Is the UPRN once again an opportunity to increase that kind of level of almost ID checking of the right to rent from a landlord perspective, or identity from renters? I mean, there presumably is once again an opportunity here that there's another level of identification that would give some additional protection against fraud potentially.
I think so, yeah, because it's centrally verifiable. But that barrier still remains, isn't it? If we are able to easily get address and UPRN, then you've got something powerful around fraud checks and that type of thing as well, because people can talk, you know, say that I live at this address, but if you're able to link a large data set through a UPRN about that address, yeah, there'll be lots and lots of other data points that you could use, you know, to reduce fraud, you know, or people fraudulently using other people's addresses. Yeah.
Well, exactly, yeah, and there's clearly that problem in the home buying and selling market, where occasionally people, you know, sell properties that they don't own. You know, there are those unfortunately extreme examples. So anything that helps with that kind of efficacy of identification can be really beneficial. Well, there are clearly huge benefits, but unfortunately, to some extent, some significant barriers, both in terms of awareness and I guess just the economy of scale, which obviously perhaps plays against startups, particularly in the prop tech world, on the basis that obviously a larger operation would have the scale to perhaps afford the access rights. But this does feel like a missed opportunity in terms of innovation from the sector.
I think so, because you just don't know who's going to come with the bright spark idea, right? And that's where then having barriers to that make it difficult. You know, Ordnance Survey have gone some way towards this by having, you know, sort of developer level licenses that aren't so expensive, but there are restrictions around the usage and how much data you can pull and things like that. So, you know, there are ways to go around it, but in the end, you've got to still buy that data, and you've got to add that cost onto your cost of your product as well. You know, indeed. So yeah, it seems that if we want to be really serious about adoption, there's two things to do. One is lobby, you know, central government about opening and freeing up a little bit more data, particularly the address string that goes with the UPRN. And a big exercise between perhaps all of us that are in the industry, whether it's organizations like RICS or PropTechs, getting together with property industry, with local government, because really just getting together and talking about it and bringing awareness will allow, I think, collaboration between the tech people in all of those different sectors, and that's where it's really going to happen. When we actually start talking to each other and giving each other examples of how we've implemented it. You can imagine people in the local authorities tech team are going to go, oh yeah, okay, see how that works. That's a really good idea. That's probably something for RICS, I would say, getting those little discussions together and putting people together in a room to talk about it. That gets the outcome, that gets people going and building stuff together.
Indeed, no, and we're certainly talking to people like the Geospatial Commission and various other bodies, because there are so many sort of interested stakeholders, if I can use that phrase. I guess one of the challenges always with the property industry, it is quite fragmented. There are so many stakeholders involved. If you think of the full life cycle of construction and brokerage and valuation and brokerage in terms of sales and of letting, that there are so many bodies and so many people interested that would get benefit from this, in addition to central local government. And although we've not touched on in detail, your slide showed that link to the geospatial coordinates, because there's also that bigger gain about being able to look at property from a geospatial perspective and look at scale in terms of understanding EPC performance at regional, town, city level, for example, looking at planning at that macro level as well. So we perhaps talked a lot about the micro level of what do I know about an individual property, but clearly if we can begin to look at property data on that kind of regional basis, geospatially, there are huge opportunities there, particularly around things like retrofit and planning on a bigger scale.
And also I suppose one of the biggest challenges we all face, which is the climate crisis. How does this fit in? Because when we talk about the geospatial data that we can use and the sort of things we can bring together around property, we've got challenges now. We've got challenges to improve the efficiency of our built environment. We've got challenges to improve how polluted the environment is and what we do about that. And working with data at a level, it really allows us at the planning stage to look at entire locations, entire streets. I've seen great technologies being implemented already. There's another startup I'm involved in that uses UPRN right to the core, which is Nimbus Maps, and that's much more about adding many layers of data to the same UPRN on a map. And what that's allowing people to do is go, look, you know what, there's a street over here, and this street's 2 stories at the moment, but it can quite easily be 4 stories, which creates all this other accommodation for people to live in. That's happening. You'll see it up and down the country, looking at, do we add height to buildings? And if we do that, how do we do it? And how do we do it in the most efficient way? Looking at different materials and trying things out in virtual environments. We're going to need all of this to really deal with the challenge of the climate, and design our towns in a way,
it is sobering when you think that I think Savills estimated that the UK housing stock is worth, was it 6 or 7 trillion pounds, and yet we seem to have some fundamental data issues that you wouldn't imagine would exist when something that has both that value from a capital perspective, but also the social impact as well. It does seem strange, dare I say it, that we're still trying to get the basics in terms of getting data individually and at scale on property.
And I suppose we've got these competing forces here, isn't it? We can look at property high level and make strategic decisions and plans and all of that, but what you're dealing with is every single person's individual home as well. And so the marrying up or bridging those 2 disparate concerns, that's not easy.
No. Well,
that's the
this has been fascinating, Vic, and I look forward to us talking again about some of your other startups and the kind of impacts you're having. You alluded there to some geospatial work as well. So I look forward to talking to you again. And clearly, there's a lot of work for industry and bodies like ourselves to continue to influence government, local and central, to get the UPRN more widely adopted and indeed get the word out to consumers so they can see the benefit as well. So thanks
yeah.
again, been great to talk, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks, Andrew.